moment, as things change, we experience happiness or distress, but nothing steady and nothing steady. So the material world, actually what we see of it is very minute. Our vision, our power of seeing is very poor, and our perception of what we are and what to speak about what the universe is practically nil. When we come under the laws of the material nature, we forget who we are, we forget who Krishna is, we forget what this universe is, and we forget its purpose. So Krishna, being kind, he relieves us of our desires, material desires, which are actually the binding force that keeps us in this material world. Material desires are manifest in the form of attachment, lust, anger, greed, etc. These experiences that we have, these are all due to our own misdeeds, our own rejection of reality, and our insistence on participating in illusion. We have to, at some point, accept responsibility for ourselves. People, they look and see that there's wars going on all over the planet, and sometimes they say, why, if God is good, why are we all suffering? Well, God is good. You're suffering because you don't know who God is, and you haven't surrendered to Him. If you do that, then you'll also be happy. But as long as we avoid surrendering to Krishna, then we have to go through this illusory process of repeated birth, disease, old age, and death. Nothing or no one can go beyond that. So Krishna's instruction, or he's going to instruct the devotees, even his own family members are experiencing some grief, because their attachment for each other is spiritual. Just like Kunti Devi and Arjuna, there's a letter Prabhupada wrote, I forget who to now, but he explained that Kunti and Arjuna are not in the spiritual world. They're always in the material world, because they have service to do, and their service is in connection with this, setting up of the Kurus and the Pandavas and the war between them. So they are not in the spiritual world in the sense that they don't participate in the Vaikuntha Leelas, the Goloka Vrindavan Leelas, etc. Their Leela with Krishna is to be in the material world, and wherever he appears, they go with him, the whole entourage, and then they enact this arrangement of war and enmity, not for themselves, but not to cure their own desires, but to show other ordinary living beings that to desire anything material is to bring condemnation upon oneself, to entangle oneself in so-called suffering and bereavement. So Krishna, in order to shake us out of this illusion, sometimes you have to do something shocking. When you get shocked, then it stops you and makes you think, well, what am I doing? What's going on here? So this material world is set up like that. We're all actually spiritual living beings. And if we have this, if we're on the same level of Krishna consciousness as the Lord himself, then we can see this whole material world for what it actually is, just an illusionary manifestation. But if we don't take the time and trouble to think what we are, where have we come from, and where are we going, then naturally we'll stagger along in the midst of this seeming suffering of birth, old age, disease, and death. Nobody dies, nobody suffers actually. That's our illusion. But because we're in illusion, then it seems to be a perpetual process. So Krishna arranges things every now and again so that all the living beings can come back to their true state of spiritual consciousness. So here we have some of the Pandavas, some of the Kurus, they're gathering together, the war is over, millions and millions of soldiers have been killed, so many great heroes have been killed, but have they actually been killed? That's the question. And the answer, of course, is no. As living beings, we continue on. We're simply moving from one place to another. But because we lack knowledge and we lack an understanding of the real nature of ourselves and others, therefore we suffer. So the Bhagavatam is aimed at relieving us of that suffering by education, by knowledge. Because we're in ignorance, we have to be taught what reality actually is. Yeah, it's not something that we can simply take any time. We can educate ourselves. We need to be given information from a source which is not an illusion. That, of course, originally is Krishna, and then coming down from Krishna, there is a parampara of teachers who remind us what we are, why we're here, and what we can do to mitigate our suffering. That's the Guru Parampara. That's the business of the representative of Krishna. Those who actually represent Krishna, they know the purpose for which these activities like the Kurukshetra war, they know what they're for, why they're enacted. So we have to hear from authority. Yeah, the Guru means one who is heavy with knowledge. They're not bewildered by the force of time. Yeah, ultimately, because birth, death, disease, and old age, that represents the cycles of time, or a way of measuring time itself. The material world is completely under the jurisdiction of the movements caused by time. We have the three modes of material nature. We have the spirit souls, and their interaction in due course of time creates what we think is reality, this material world. So I don't know. You have to excuse me a second. Can you just complete on the other side, on this side? Sorry, it's another material botheration. Just press my foot. Yes, it's always underneath. Press it hard. Yeah, this massage. So time catches up with all of us. What at one time seems to be enjoyable, at another time becomes a source of utter misery. Yeah, we see other living beings in the various modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, and by becoming attracted to those manifestations of the modes, then we experience what we think is happiness or distress. Actually, the position of the soul never changes. It's just the material body. Nowadays, we're seeing practically. Yesterday, I was at a feast held in honor of, I forget the lady's name. She was a long-time devotee, and she just left her body the day after Gaurpurnima. And a couple of days ago, I got word from one of my godbrothers in Sydney that he's got throat cancer, so he hasn't got very long to live. Actually, none of us have got very long to live, but we persist in perpetuating this illusion that we are the body and that we're here to enjoy separately from Krishna. So Dharma is mentioned here as being the process by which we can alleviate the sufferings that we think that we're going through. If we follow the process of Dharma or religion, the laws of God, Prabhupada says we can be happy in this life and in the next. The karmis, they have no idea. those who are not God conscious, who are not on the platform, same conscious platform as the Lord, then they have to suffer. They're in this material world, they don't know how to get out, so their only business is to suffer from one life to another. But those who are on the same platform as the Lord, they see this universe and its purpose and how it works in exactly the same way as the Lord himself. So in that way they can remain aloof from any distress and suffering. So I'm gonna is there anybody have any questions or comments? Yeah. Does that I'm sorry, this is a bit of an interruption. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
It's a comment that Arjuna, he doesn't have a form in the spiritual world, you said.
Well, according to the letter that I read from Prabhupada, he said Kunti and Arjuna are not in the spiritual world, they're always in the material world.
But we see they have different forms also. They have different forms. Like
I don't know.
Nara, Narayana,
well, yeah,
Arjuna, and there's 5 forms of Pandavas. Have a place at Radhakunda. When Raghunath Das Goswami was clearing the jungles and everything at Radhakund, that night he had a dream, and they said, "Don't chop those 4 or 5 trees down. This is the Pandavas. We're here." So they may not have a spiritual body, but they certainly can expand in different kinds of forms.
Yes, they can change their form according to the suitability for the pastime that they're interacting with the Lord with. So although they're in the material world, they are spiritual. They're not affected by the 3 modes of material nature. So actually, the devotees of the Lord have the same qualities as the Lord. There's this story of what was his name? King Satyajit and Baulasva. They were 2 great devotees. Krishna was on tour with all the sages and saints. They always follow him. So both of these devotees wanted to see Krishna and invite them to their homes, but they didn't. There was not enough time in the schedule to go to one place and then the other. So Krishna expanded himself and went to both places at the same time. But not just Krishna, all the sages and friends that were traveling with him, they also visited both places at the same time. They had the same spiritual quality as Krishna. So the manifestation of different forms is just when it's suitable for the performance of a Leela, then they can do that, even if they're in the so-called material world. I mean, actually the material world is an illusion anyway, but just for our understanding. Is that right? Or, I mean, that's the way I understood it.
Also, when Krishna said, "I first taught this message to the sun god, Vivishwan," you were also present there, Arjuna. Prabhupada said he had a fire body, otherwise how he could be on the sun planet.
Right.
He said, "I was there. You were there also, but you can't remember because you change your body. I don't change my body, therefore I can remember, but you cannot remember."
Right. Thank you. Another question or comment? Anybody else?
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, you mentioned that in this material world there is shock sometimes to wake us to the reality. So is there always this shock required to wake up to the reality?
This what?
You mentioned that in this world there is sometimes shock.
Shock.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So
Yes, sometimes you have to be shocked. People are in so much illusion. Just like I have an old school friend. So he was married to this lady for about 38 years. So, they were as one, as you might say. 38 years is quite a long time to be with somebody. And then all of a sudden, she contracted cancer and died within 2 months. So he was so shocked. He was telling me afterwards, for months afterwards, he couldn't get over it. And he was even contemplating suicide to end his suffering. He was suffering so much. But then this other lady that he used to know long time ago, she suddenly bumped into him one day. They got talking, and then the next thing they're together. So after having been shocked that his wife of 38 years was now dead and gone, then again within a few months he puts himself right back in the same situation with another woman. And of course she's also going to die, or he's going to die. So that repetition of ignorance, or illusion, that's there. Everybody has that. But if you can somehow or another understand the temporary nature of material life, then you don't get shocked like that. All right, we may lament the losing their association, but we know everybody's going to be, grow old, get diseased and die, and then have to take another birth and repeat the same process, chewing the chewed. So we have to learn, but we're forgetful because we're very tiny. We get overwhelmed by the material nature, and we forget what went on just a few years back, and whatever's going on now in a few years' time we'll have forgotten that too. So forgetfulness is the hallmark of material life. Remembrance of Krishna is the antidote. Therefore Lord Chaitanya came to give us a simple process. We can't follow the Varnashram Dharma anymore. It's too difficult in this age of Kali. But what we can do is chant Hare Krishna. By chanting Hare Krishna, we're always remembering the Supreme Lord and our relationship with Him. And then when these so-called shocking events occur, what's the ultimate shock? That the person that you know and love, or you think you know and love, suddenly dies. So then you get a shock. But that shock is to remind you, this is just an illusion. This, what you thought was this person, is not somebody else. A spirit soul. So we have to train the mind, train the intellect by practice. So we're given a process of sadhana, different practices which will gradually cleanse the heart, and then as the heart becomes cleansed, we realize that we're not the body. That's the first thing. And if we pursue that under proper direction of the Guru, then we can come eventually to the point of being completely clear of what the modes are, what the living entities are, who God is, what this material world is, how is time working. These are the subject matters of the Bhagavad Gita. So we need a little help. So the Guru is there to give that help. So if we somehow or another, just like the Pandavas and the Kurus, they were all related, but the Kurus were inimical. So even when Krishna would give them some instruction sometimes, Duryodhana, he wouldn't accept it. So because of that, the Kurus were ruined. They lost everything. Whereas the Pandavas, they went through the whole thing, working hard, fighting the war, but they came through it by Krishna's remembrance, actually, always remembering Krishna. So, we get shocked when they're in the material world, but that can be alleviated by a liberated soul. So therefore the first instruction is that one should try to find a self-realized soul who can impart true knowledge to us, and then we can get over these shocks, or we'll no longer be shocked. There was a girl that came to see Srila Prabhupada in November of 1976. Her name was Manisha. So she was only about 14 or 15 years old, but she had leukemia. That's like cancer of the blood. So she was going to die. None of the doctors could do anything more. And so her mother brought her to Vrindavan so that she could live out the rest of her life, whatever was left of it, in a holy place, thinking of Krishna. Still, she was a young girl, so she was a little, emotional about the whole thing. So they got a darshan with Srila Prabhupada, and the girl was crying. She was emotionally becoming unstable. When you get too emotional, your brain stops working properly. Yeah, you get mixed up, befuddled. So this girl was crying. So Prabhupada, normally he would say, try and pacify them and, cheer them up, as we say. But Prabhupada was very strong with her. He said, who do you think is going to live? He said, we're all going to die. You'll die today, he'll die tomorrow, I'll die the next day. Everybody is going to die. So just chant Hare Krishna. So like this, he practically chastised her for about 10 minutes, very stern. But that being stern, normally you would think that if a person comes to another person who's dying and they speak harshly or strongly to them, you wouldn't want them around. But when Prabhupada spoke, it may have been taken as being a little harsh, but it shocked the girl back into a proper consciousness. Yes, we're all going to die. Even if I don't, die from leukemia, I'm going to die from something else anyway. So that was her opportunity, that at 14 years old, she only had a short while in the material world before going back to Godhead, because she left the body in Mathura. So that was due to Prabhupada's instruction. So this girl was actually in a very fortunate position. So if we can also, we should remain in a state of shock, knowing that this body is, just a lump of ignorance, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says. We should understand it, always remember it, this body is not real. Yeah. What's real is the soul that supports all the elements of the body, the mind, the intellect, etc. That all right? Okay, I'm going to finish at this point, a little short, but thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.